I'm Dr. David Martin. I'm president of the Friends of the Battlefield. We are a volunteer support group. The full-time staff here is only 6 or 7 people. We have seasonal, that includes maintenance. We are understaffed. We haven't had a superintendent for several years. And so they really need our help. We do walking tours free, first Sunday every month at 1:30. And these tours, which are smartly called, this is our second tours, these talks, the second year of the second Sunday talks, to help you remember when they are, and they're at 2. The topics are posted for the year on our website, friendsofmonmouth.org. That's the second thing we do. The third thing we do is to interpret the Craig House 1750 colonial farmhouse over off of Route 9 and Shibanoff Lane, across from Brock Orchards. Troops of both armies passed over that in the course of the battle, and we are pretty sure it was used as a hospital, as every farmhouse within walking distance of here would have been. And the fourth thing that we do is to sponsor the co-sponsor the reenactment, which we had 2 weeks ago. We had about 5,000 people here each day, and it was a lovely event. It's mid-sized, which means you could get to see everything. The big event will be in 2028. We have a date set already, and it will be monstrous as our 250th anniversary. So look at our website, friendsofmonmouth.org, and get the dates on your calendar. Okay, I have some handouts here. So I'm a school teacher, so I like to have handouts. I'm not big on PowerPoints, never was. So Gary, could you help?
Sure.
With this? So there's 2 handouts from different versions of the talk. When I get a copy, I'll explain it a little better. One of them has a portrait of Colonel Vredenburg, or Major Vredenburg, who's the namesake of the training camp here at the battlefield that I'll be talking about. He was killed in action at the Battle of Fort Winchester. I'll be talking about that also as I do the unit history. Another version of it has his horse next to him. His horse survived the battle, and I found the picture of the horse at Monmouth County Historical Association. The color set has his uniform that he was wearing the day he got killed. As we'll talk cover in the talk, he was hit by an artillery shell in the neck. So the uniform pretty much survived, and it's shown now at the museum at Monocacy down in Maryland outside of Frederick. But it's amazing to look at that, or I've seen Stonewall Jackson's uniform the day he was shot, how thin they were compared to what we are now. But remember, they're living out in the field for years, living on army rations, so, and in better shape than certainly I am. There's also should be a map of the Battle of Monocacy and a map of Fort Winchester and a plan of the park, of the campsite. So I'm just gathering while you get the handouts done. Okay, thank you, Matt. Okay, anybody need one? I have here the color one. Everybody have the color one with the uniform as a color, and Fort Winchester, and on the back is Major Vredenburg and his horse.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the other one has Major Vredenburg, a plan of the camp, the battle of, another battle of Fort Winchester, and the monument, the battle monument. Okay. What's interesting with this park, and it was created in the early 70s, and it opened in time for the bicentennial in 1978. Raise your hand if you were here then. Okay, I guess okay. And we bought up, now it covers around 2,000 acres. It was originally around 1,000. The group I'm in, the Friends of Monmouth Battlefield, has acquired lands adjacent. But pretty much now we are surrounded by Route 9, housing developments on 2 sides, and 33 business down here. The battle area, as recognized by the National Battlefield Historic Trust, is about twice this size, because during the course of the battle it flowed from the battle area you can see outside the hill here into town and back. but much as Gettysburg and Manassas and other battles, they were fought because of the road junctions in the towns and the battles going through the towns. At the time of the war, Monmouth Courthouse, as they called it then, had about 45 buildings in it. And there's certainly a lot more than that now. It's hard to, again, acquire that land, although I do tours out there once in a while. So in the 70s, when they created the park here, it accidentally included the area of a Civil War training camp called Camp Vredenburg, which is located near the Cobb House out this way about a mile, just off of Route 522. During the Civil War, New Jersey raised around 80,000 troops, and they had about 12 or so different training camps where the troops could go for a brief training, although they were issued their uniforms and muskets, but often did not do target practice with their muskets. Story of one regiment, the 11th New Jersey, went into the battle of, it was raised the same time as the 14th New Jersey I'll be talking about, went into the Battle of Antietam having never fired their muskets before, because the government didn't want to spend the money on the ammunition. So there were about 12 different training camps, and the early ones were all raised down at regiments raised at Camp Holden in Trenton. Each regiment would run around 1,000 men initially. Molly, what did you do with your stick? Did you lose it out there? Look, I've only got one more. Are you going to behave, or are you going to take this away? Okay, this is what, okay. Molly, dance. Molly, dance. Molly, dance. Good girl. Okay. So by 1862, a lot of people thought the war would be over in a year. It wasn't. So by 1862, they went to regional training camps. And the regional training camp for central New Jersey was located, again, a mile off that way, called Camp Vredenburg after Peter Vredenburg Sr., a noted judge in the area. And here 3 regiments were raised in the summer of 1862. The 14th New Jersey, about which my talk will be today, which was a unit signing up for 3 years. And 2 regiments, the 28th and 29th, that were signing up for 9 months. And there was some competition between the two, because if I win the war, I probably would have enlisted for 9 months rather than 3 years, especially if the bounties are the same. Because this is relatively rural here, the campsite remained basically untouched. Other campsites, Camp Holden and Trenton largely has Hamilton Square on top of it. Camp Fair Oaks up in Flemington, they had the Flemington Fairgrounds there. It's now a housing development. The camp up in Newark got built over. So this might be the only largely preserved Civil War training camp left in the state, and the site is pretty pristine. In the 1980s, I got a grant from the state to locate it, which I did using documents and an old map I found at all places over at Old Tennant Church. And I did a preliminary drawing of what it might look like and wrote that up in a booklet that's available in the gift shop on the Civil War training camp that I'll be talking about as the first part of the lecture. So in that camp, 3,000 troops were raised. The first 1,000 got to use tents, the other ones used barracks, and the 14th New Jersey, 3 years, was raised that summer. It's interesting to look through the newspapers where there's ads for firewood and other items. Why did they build a Civil War training camp here? Well, it is in central New Jersey, and it's just the right distance from town, about 1.5 miles, 2 miles, so that you could clear out the bars and bawdy houses and get everybody back to camp by curfew. There's a little railroad line here, the Freehold and Jamesburg Agricultural Railroad, that they could move troops in and out. When it does come time for the 14th and the other regiments to go to war, they'll take the train down to Trenton and then take a boat down to Philadelphia, and then either take a train or boat to Annapolis or to Washington. So it's a handy transportation system, just the right distance from town. They leased the ground from a local farmer named Jacob Herbert. I've looked and looked through the state treasurer's records to find a copy of the lease, which I wasn't able to find. I didn't know what fee they paid. And apparently what had happened, and this is what I got from the map from the church, was Mr. Herbert owned a piece of land on Route 520, what is Route 522, but he also had a woodline lot over by the stream, by the Middle Brook. And that's what he leased to the state. A lot of farmers then, you always assume if they've got 200 acres, it's all contiguous. Well, they're not always. Okay, Mr. Herbert had his main farm on the roadway, and then what he called a wood lot in the back, which he used for wood. for once in a while you can graze your cows or something back there. And that's what he leased to the state. So the site has been pretty much untouched. I did use what physical records we have, and we do have one photograph of the camp, which I put in the book from the Monmouth County Historical Association, showing the wooden barracks. You can come up and look at this afterwards if you want to. Not much archaeological remains. We have yet to do a full archaeological survey, though one's been partly done, because the barracks would have had posts in the ground, but they're kind of hard to find. There were scraps of this, that, and the other thing around, parts of muskets, knapsacks, whatever, but no musket balls, as again, because they're not using musket training. What's interesting is some, I'll call them friends of mine in the Diggers Club, went out, and I went out with them one session to survey the area, and they were finding percussion caps. Now, when you shoot a Revolutionary War musket, you know, it's muzzle loading, you gotta load it here, and then you gotta prime it, and you have to have a flint, so that when you pull the trigger, the flint makes a spark, that makes the pan go off and make the musket shoot. Civil War days, they're not using flints anymore, they're using something like a little percussion cap that's brass. Okay, brass doesn't disintegrate, it's still on all the battlefields. So when the Archaeology Club was doing the survey, they found all these percussion caps. And I said, oh, that's fantastic. Do any of them have my fingerprints on them? Because I was in Company F of the 14th New Jersey Reactivated, and we used to train on the site of the camp. And we would fire muskets, not real bullets, but we'd fire fake rounds with the musket caps. So the musket caps they found, and we're going to put in the museum as originals, aren't. They're ones with my fingerprints on them, which is pretty cool, from the reenactors. So that summer, the 14th was training there. It left for the war first at the end of August, August 26th, 1862. The 28th and 29th regiments left the next week and also went down to Virginia. And I'll be talking about them in December, because they were heavily engaged at the Battle of Fredericksburg on February 12th, 1862, and a couple of the soldiers were badly wounded and died there, and I'm going to tell their stories based on their diaries, which is pretty good. So we do 2 Civil War lectures a year, one in the summer for the 14th, and the one in December for the 28th and 29th. I used to do one in September for Major Vredenburg, because he was killed in September, and then we'd actually adjourn and go out to his grave here in Maplewood Cemetery. But we weren't getting very good attendance on that, so we're not doing that anymore. So Camp Vredenburg is here from 1862 to 64. Again, they raised 3,000 men here in the summer of 1862. 1864, they tried, you can let her go, Gary, okay. Although she lost her stick, didn't she? Okay. They were going to raise another regiment here in 64, but they only got one company raised. So they shipped it off to Flemington, and the barracks were torn down and sent to Trenton, and it's not there anymore. Although the site is still there. We had thought at one point about letting reenactors camp there and drill there, but it's too far from the site here. So we do have living history here once or twice a month, both Civil War and Revolution. You can check with the office on what the schedule is. They camp over by where General von Steuben's statue is, and do living history, which is, you know, what's it like to be a soldier, eat their food, live in their tents, and sometimes they also reenact. So again, this is named after Peter Vredenburg Sr., a local judge. His son, Peter Vredenburg Jr., was an officer in the unit, and I'd say will be killed in action later in the war. Okay, so that's the brief history of the camp. Now I want to talk about the history of the unit. Okay, Civil War units were numbered by the state. Usually there are United States troops. There's some regulars that were in existence before and after the war. And most, but not all, of the colored troops were enlisted as United States colored troops. A fair amount of colored troops from New Jersey served, but they were trained in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, and were credited to the enlistment from the state. In New Jersey, we had 40 regiments of around 1,000 men each, plus 5 batteries. Why do I say there's 80,000 troops, but 40 regiments and 1,000 each? Because a lot of guys re-enlisted. Most of the troops enlisted in 1861 were 30 days troops. They thought the war would be over in 30 days. How stupid that is. You could barely get to the camp, get your equipment, get down to Virginia. Oops, time to go home. With the 9 months units that went in 1st of September of '62, they were down in a battle or two, Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville. Their 9 months was up at the end of June 1863, which was when Robert E. Lee was invading Pennsylvania, and most of them went home because their enlistments were up. One regiment offered to stay past their 9 months' time. They were sent to Harrisburg to help dig trenches there. So they had a decent service, but some troops had served 3 times, 61, 2 or 3, enlistment 62, 63, and at the end of the war they were giving really big enlistment bonuses. I know my great-grandfather and his brother were in a battery from Michigan. They enlisted in 1862. They fought in the West, 8th Michigan Battery. They got enticed to re-enlist in 1864, by which they got a nice bonus. And they used that money to buy a farm after the war, and that's where my grandfather was born, and where my line comes from. So thank you, government, for the land grant, for the pension to those soldiers. So the 14th New Jersey, as I said, was enlisted in August 22nd, 1862. They went south towards Washington and then were assigned a post at Frederick, Maryland. Frederick's a cool place because it's halfway between Antietam and Gettysburg for you Civil War lovers. And their job there was to guard the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Bridge over the Monocacy River. And they spent about a year there doing that, not fighting. They even missed out on the Battle of Gettysburg because they were down there guarding the river. And what's interesting is while they were there, they became very friendly with the town residents, especially the girls. A number of soldiers died of disease, and it's interesting to go over, I list them in the booklet, like 32 or so soldiers who died when they were at camp down on the Monocacy River at Frederick, Maryland, not fighting. Measles, smallpox, drowned in the river, got run over by the train. Things that we think are odd, but those things happen to soldiers. And they're there for that year. They will get called up to the Army after Gettysburg, because Gettysburg has so many heavy casualties, they need to regrow the Army. Now, while Major Vredenburg was down there, he made good friends with a family called the Thomases, and their house will figure important in the Battle of Monocacy that's coming up. So much so that when his unit went up to the Army right after Gettysburg, he had a dog named Dash, not as cute as Molly, of course, and he left it with the Thomases. And he will reconnect with them shortly. So the 14th New Jersey, I say, didn't do a lot. They were in the Army, eating rations, sleeping outside. They're just guarding a railroad bridge for a year. They will be very heavily engaged in the second half of the war after Gettysburg. Particularly at the Battle of Cold Harbor in early 1862, or 1864, excuse me, where Grant made his worst mistake of the war and charged it against some Confederate trenches and had terrible casualties. I think the only attacks that were worse were Pickett's charge at Gettysburg and Fredericksburg. It's the only battlefield I've been at. I went down there to see where the 14th New Jersey fought, where I got the willies in the back of my head. I knew where the regiment was. I knew what happened there. I knew there were guys still buried there. And I'm not going back to Cold Harbor. Thank you. The regiment then fought in the battles down near Petersburg until later in 1864. The nature of the war will change slightly. We think of Gettysburg and Antietam as the South's major invasions of the North. As you know, Antietam in September 1862, Lee invaded and fought to a stalemate, but eventually had to give up in the invasion of Maryland. In 1863, he made it all the way up to almost to Harrisburg and fought Gettysburg, came back. 1864, in order to draw Grant's army away from Richmond, or part of it, he sent General Jubal Early up to invade Maryland again. And on the way, he will fight this battle at Frederick that I'll be talking about, but he did get as far as Washington. At Washington, D.C., this is the only battle in the Civil War where the president came under fire. Actually, only twice in U.S. history has our president been under fire. The first was the Battle of Bladensburg, Maryland, and I will tip my hat to you if you know, Gary's nodding there knowingly. In 1814, outside of Washington, the British attacked, and James Madison, Shorty Madison, went out to see what was going on, and they lost, and D.C. got burnt down, and that's when they rebuilt they repainted the White House white because it had been burned down, and Madison was under fire in the battle we lost. At the battle outside of Washington, Lincoln is there seeing what's going on. Now, a bullet zings by him, whereby an officer next door to him happened to be Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., the detective writer, and says, "Sir, maybe you ought to get down, because here's a tall, skinny guy with a tall top hat on, and the Confederate sharpshooters are shooting at him." Okay, so that's interesting, but Lincoln was under fire in one battle. He wanted to go out and see what was going on. Now, how did that attack end up there? Well, when General Early invades Maryland, he heads right for that bridge at Frederick. And right now it's being held by like Ohio militia. Now, militia we kind of sting our nose at, and they're like the National Guard of the day. The Ohio militia got called up, but they didn't really know what they're doing. A few local troops were there, so they decided to send a division of troops from Grant's army down at Richmond and Petersburg up to Frederick to guard that bridge. And the division they picked was the one the 14th New Jersey was in, because they knew the area. So that division shows up. The army is commanded, put together a motley group by Lew Wallace, who's more famous for being author of Ben-Hur, the novel, good movie, but not one of the top generals, because this is kind of a backwoods. So the Union troops line up to guard the river, and General Early attacks them, and we hold out for a while. And during a time of the battle, the 14th New Jersey was sent off to the left of the line where the Confederate troops had crossed the river lower than Frederick and were coming up the wrong side of the riverbank for us at the Thomas House. Now, I mentioned the Thomas House. Vredenburg knew the family, and they had his dog. And during the battle, he came to check up on them. And they were all in the basement, hiding in their house. And he brought their dishes from the dining room down to them so they wouldn't get broken or stolen during the battle. Pretty cool. During the course of the Confederate attack, the Union line finally broke, and this is a battle we lost. But it's called, an author named Glenn Worthington wrote a book called The Battle That Saved Washington. We slowed him down enough, the Confederate Army under General Early, even though we lost the battle, that Grant was able to get more troops up to Washington to guard that fort line, where that attack happened, where President Lincoln got shot at. So the Confederate troops, because they got slowed down by the 14th New Jersey in the battle that saved Washington, Battle of Monocacy. And that's, by the way, when I wrote a book on the regiment, I called them the Monocacy Regiment, and that has the name that has stuck with it since I wrote this book 40 years ago. It's now in rare books, it's been out of print for quite a while. The 14th fought nobly but lost in its biggest battle after it had its biggest casualties down at Cold Harbor. So it got pretty beat up in the summer of '64. And then they will also be over after this campaign. They're going to chase Early back to Virginia in the Shenandoah Valley. And there's another series of battles, and this is what we'll be talking about as we deal with his death. Now, I wanted to tell you, or stop for a moment to do a couple case studies before we go into Major Vredenburg's case study. What's interesting when you're writing the books is that you can get the records of these officers or even private soldiers of when and how they died or when and how they lived. And these keep popping up, especially in pension records. So I'll just cite a few of these as primary case studies. Cornelius Barkalow was from Howell Township. He was born in 1842, so it puts him 21, maybe average age or so for soldiers in the war. He was in Company A of the 14th New Jersey. At the 14th fight at Monocacy, by the way, it's July 9th, 1864, which is why I'm doing the talk at this time in July to commemorate that battle. He was wounded and captured. Okay. A lot of the, if you're lucky, you'll get slightly wounded and be able to wander off the field and not have your arm or leg or something cut off. If you're badly wounded, you will stay upon the field. I was thinking of John Burns, who was the former constable at Gettysburg. When the battle was going on, July 1st, 1863, picked up his old musket and went out to fight and got himself wounded. He lay on the field for a day and a half. And fortunately, he wasn't taken prisoner because he didn't have a uniform on. I guess he could have been shot. So finally, when the neighbors found him and brought him back home. When I talk about the 29th, New Jersey, one of the soldiers at Fredericksburg got badly wounded, both his legs were shot off, lay on the field for 2.5 days. They took him to the hospital, cut his legs off, and he died. What a way to go. And unfortunately, that happens because of the bad state of the medicine, the nasty nature of the bullets, although all war is bad that way. And also bear in mind that for every soldier killed in battle, 3 soldiers are dying of disease. But we remember the ones who died more in the battle. What's interesting was when he was captured, I talk about Barkalow, at Monocacy, the guy who captured him was a Confederate soldier that Barkalow had captured in an earlier battle. And the soldier recognized him and saw that he got prompt medical attention, and his life got saved. There's examples of that of the Masonic Monument at Gettysburg, where quite often if you're lying there wounded and you're a Mason and somebody comes to help you, you ask about his mother's son or something like that, and that's the code word that Masons use to each other. And some of the generals and privates would save each other that way. Another interesting story, just because I love telling the stories, one of the New Jersey guys killed in a different battle. A Confederate picked up his diary and flipped it over and started writing from the other end. And the owner of that diary now has, first half of the war, what happened to this Union soldier that was killed in the battle, and the second half of the war starts at the back and works the other way. A Confederate soldier was reusing it. And those diaries still surface now and then, and they're pretty cool. I actually happened upon one. I was working in the gift shop here one day, and a fellow came in and said, I found this diary in somebody's attic I was cleaning, can you do something with it? It turned out to be a diary of a Major Lee, L-E-I-G-H, from the 1st Virginia Irish Battalion, an original diary from Stonewall Jackson's 1862 Shenandoah Valley campaign. I've still edited it. I'm not finishing anything to get it published. Those things are still out there, and they're just really neat to read the first-hand accounts, not so much even of the battles, but what was the weather like, how were they feeling, how were they marching, what happened to their friends. Anyway, I'm digressing. I love to tell the stories. Roderick Clark was a waterman from Point Pleasant. He was in Company F of the 14th, that's the unit that I was in recreating, and he enlisted here in the 14th New Jersey. He was badly wounded, like many of his friends, at Monocacy. He was hit by 2 bullets, one of which shattered his left leg below the knee, and the other went through his right lung. And so the problem was once you get wounded and go down, you can get hit by all those other stray shots that are going on. As he lay wounded, a Confederate infantryman used his body for cover and a rifle rest. Yuck. When the rebel fired, Clark's face got singed by the powder, and he narrowly escaped being hit when the Yankees were shooting at the Confederate guy and killed him. So he got left on the field. His leg was wounded, or his wounded leg was amputated, and so he's sent home. He's sent back to New York and returned to Point Pleasant with a disability pension of $8 a month. $8 doesn't even buy a lunch at McDonald's anymore. But bear in mind, the average working wage in those days was $12 to $14 a month. So he's got a pension from the government, and he bought some land on the Manasquan River and lived out his life until he died in 1929, 64 years after the battle. So he survived without his leg, and there were a lot of one-legged soldiers, one-armed soldiers around him. Okay, let me just share with you one more, because these are all interesting stories and they're taken from my book. James Taylor, not the singer, was born in 1842 in Lambertville, up on the Delaware. Enlisted in Trenton in Company B of the 14th. and he served. He was ill and out of action for almost 2 years, but returned in time to fight at Monocacy, where he was captured when the regiment broke and was overwhelmed by the Confederates. He was originally reported as missing. His fate wasn't clarified until a scrap of paper bearing his signature was found on the battlefield. So they thought, well, maybe at least he was here. It was a hastily scrawled note, later published in a Trenton newspaper, saying that he was a prisoner of war. Tell his parents. So that was pretty clever of him to write that. I know, like at the Battle of Fredericksburg, where the troops didn't expect to come out alive, they would act, because they didn't have dog tags, write their name on a scrap of paper and put it in their pocket so their body could be identified afterwards. Yuck. So he spent 7 months as a prisoner at Danville, Virginia, where his health was bad, and was finally released in February of 1865. And after the war, he survives until 1904. So all these soldiers will have interesting stories to tell the more you get into it. Again, I don't have time to be covering them all now. Okay, now, at Monocacy, the regiment had very heavy officer casualties. Major Vredenburg, who had been trained as a lawyer and was the star of his family, probably would have been a casualty at Monocacy, except he had taken a desk job as Inspector General of his division. That's how he was able, during the course of the battle, to come down to the Thomas house. His dog, I guess, wasn't there anymore, but to help out the Thomas family and to save their silverware and dishes. After the battle, when all the field officers were casualties, he did a brave thing. He volunteered to come back to the regiment and give up his desk job. And even though they didn't want to lose him as a good staff officer in the 6th Corps, that's what he will do. And he will, from then on, or soon after Monocacy, become commander of the 14th New Jersey in action. Now, why is this a significant deed? Well, the first battle that he leads his troops in will be 3rd Winchester. Now, if you look at your handouts, okay, what did I just do with my handouts? Here we are. Yeah. Okay, that's the one with the color on it. Here we are. Okay, one without the color on it. When you look at the Battle of Monocacy, and it's kind of hard to figure out because there's a Battle of 3rd Winchester, there's a major road that goes down the center of the map. And on this major road, and I'm having trouble finding out which one it is here, but take my word for it. The Union's on the right, Confederates are on the left. The 14th New Jersey was on the road. And they were directed by their general, when the attack came, to go on the road. And the other units were lined up on them as they advanced. So it's a point of honor for the 14th New Jersey to be the center of this attack. The downside was, at the other end of the road is the Confederate artillery. And where are they going to be shooting? But straight forward, because that's open ground, because it's road. So as Major Vredenburg is leading his 14th New Jersey in the attack, he turns to his troops and says, "Come on, boys, follow me." Turns back and gets hit in the neck by an artillery shell. Is killed instantly. So he gave up his desk job to lead in this one battle, and died at the very beginning of it. Now, as I mentioned, his jacket that he was wearing is on the colored handout. It got saved by the family, got returned to the family. The horse he was riding was not killed, and I'm not sure where it spent out the war. It must have been here in Freehold, since we had a picture of it here. And he was buried in Maplewood Cemetery up off of Route 9. What's interesting, when you go to his grave there, there's a big monument because his father, Judge Vredenburg, was a big guy. And Peter Vredenburg, the elder son, was supposed to take over the practice. He was a trained lawyer and gave his life in the war. Yet the tombstone he has is half the size of this speaker podium and does not mention his Army service. It just says Peter Vredenburg Jr., birthday 1864. I used to go out there to make sure there'd at least be a flag on it as a veteran. There are veterans groups that go around and mark veterans' graves on Memorial Day, but unless they have a map of the cemetery, they're not going to know who is and not, and especially this one, because it doesn't give his unit number on it. What's odd, and that is quite odd, because with most Civil War veterans, the biggest thing they did in their life and the thing they wanted to be remembered most for was fighting in the war. When I go to my great-grandfather's grave outside of Pontiac, Michigan, it says George Martin, and my middle name's George after him, Company H, 1st Michigan Artillery. And I'd like to, even now, especially up in Cranberry or where I live in Hightstown, wander through a cemetery and look at the regiment numbers. Because most regiments were raised locally, even the companies, and think of where that person might have fought in the war. But with Major Vredenburg, they did not put his unit number there. I have to make sure there's a flag there, or I have one I can put there when I go visited it. And I'd say we used to do services there in September in commemoration of his passing. That's the sad story of Major Vredenburg. War is a terrible thing. As one of the ancient Greek historians said, what's bad about war, in war, the fathers bury the sons instead of the sons burying the fathers. I did have the opportunity to meet a descendant of Major Peter Vredenburg 20, 30 years ago, and in appreciation for me writing the unit history, he gave me a signed picture, a signed portrait of Major Vredenburg, which I have hanging up in my den. And I asked him at the time two things. One, do you spell Vredenburg with an H on the end or not? And he said, depends on what branch of the family you come from. I have some cups that I picked up at Gettysburg one day. They're spelled Gettysburg, Gettysburg. Somebody misspelled it, and they actually have been, as an error, a collector's item. Gettysburg does not have an H on the end, although Berg is German, as you know, for town. And I also asked him, how do you pronounce your name? Is it Vredenburg or Vredenburg? And he told me his name was Peter Vredenburg. Depends on what branch of the family you're in. So I'm safe pronouncing it either way. And I usually spell it without the H, although sometimes I slip through and stick the H on it. So let's just continue the history of the regiment, of which Major Vredenburg was a major part, it having been raised here on site of the battlefield. Again, when the state bought the land for the battlefield in the 1970s, they sure weren't looking to include Camp Vredenburg. It just accidentally got included. Now, local tradition was that it was in the area somewhere, but again, the grant I got from the state in the 1980s, I pretty much proved it, and there have been enough military artifacts found there to show that's it. We just haven't gotten around to doing a full archaeological dig of it yet. And the regiment will go in for the length of the war and come back home in 1865. Now, what will happen is later, they put a monument up, and I think one of the handouts has a picture of the monument of it, of the 14th New Jersey Regiment at Monocacy. Now, a couple odd things about this monument. A, it's a standard monument. On top of it is what they call the soldier at rest. They had certain patterns you could order, and that's the soldier there. They would adjust the cap to the symbol of the unit or the equipment to what was being used at that time in the war. So this is called Soldier at Rest. It's a life-size or larger than life-size monument figure. On the base or plinth of the monument, you'll see a cross. That's for the 6th Corps. Actually, one side is the cross for the 6th Corps. Each corps in the Union Army, around 10,000 men, had a symbol. The 14th was in the 3rd Corps for a while, which was a diamond. They spent most of their service in the 6th Corps. These crosses for you, these corps symbols, you Civil War experts, red for the 1st Division, white for the 2nd, blue for the 3rd, green for the 4th, because the 14th New Jersey was in 1st Division, 6th Corps. A red cross symbol is their Corps badge, and that's what I wear on my reenactor hat. The Corps symbol system was set up by General McClellan so that you could identify the casualties from your unit, or General Kearney. He once found a unit that was lollygagging around and started yelling at them, and he found out it wasn't one of the ones in his command. So he put together this Corps symbol system so you know who you're yelling at or who your casualties are afterwards. Below it is some bronze markers telling the history of the regiment. Now, two interesting things about this. Firstly, the monument is on a square piece of land. You see the cornfield around it, about the size of this room. And this piece of land was bought by the state of New Jersey. It still belongs to the state of New Jersey. It's not part of Maryland. So there's a little bit of New Jersey outside of Frederick, Maryland at this monument site. And the state of New Jersey has been responsible for cutting the grass and taking care of the monument. Although we've talked at times about bringing the monument back to here to Freehold, but no, it should remain where the unit was. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. Actually, I'll talk about it now. Remember that the regiment spent the first year of the war guarding the bridge over the Monocacy River, which, if the river is right here, here's the bridge. They fought mostly at the Thomas House down here. So where did they put the monument? Did they put the monument at the bridge or at the Thomas House? No, they put it in between. So what turns out is the spot where the monument is, the regiment didn't fight there. It commemorates the regiment being at this location, halfway between the blockhouse on the bridge, which is the blockhouse isn't there anymore, and the Thomas House, which was recently acquired by the park and I think is now open. Now, because of the location of it, it's next to a little overpass. And you have to know how to, on the railroad, you have to know the back road to get to it. Which I'd stop there every time I'm in Frederick to see how the monument's doing. It's been in good shape. And actually, when we had the commemoration of the Battle of Monocacy in 2014, for the 150th, I was honored with doing the dedication speech. And of all the ones I did during that sesquicentennial, this was maybe the nicest one because of the embankment on the river and on the railroad. You were able to see there. They had a band there. They had troops there. And, I got to give the speech. It was just a really, really neat, moving event to commemorate this monument, which is still there. But again, the monument is not where the unit fought because it's halfway between the blockhouse and where the fight was. And that's how they decided to do it. And this is a spot of land that belongs to New Jersey, even though it's in the middle of Maryland. And that was put up in 1907. So that pretty much tells the history of the 14th New Jersey. Now, being a school teacher, I'll repeat it because they taught us in teacher school. If you repeat or summarize, you guys will remember it a little bit better. And Molly has settled down and gone to sleep because she's bored enough now and ate all the candies I had to give to her. Here on Monocacy Battlefield, Revolutionary War, June 28, 1778, the 4,000 to 5,000 acres is the area of the battle. The park's only 2,000. But as by accident, as I said, the area in which the Civil War training camp was located got included. And by local lore and the research I did in the 1980s, I proved that that's where the camp was. It's one of 12 New Jersey Civil War training camps that's the most pristine. It's still there. It could be dug up. But archaeology takes a lot of time and a lot of money to go through scoop by scoop to try and figure out where those post holes were for the barracks. It might be easier to find where there was a railroad station there, find that, the latrines, or the hospital or cooking tents. If I had the time or money, but that may not happen, but at least the land is not a housing development. Originally, the ground on which this park is existing was planned to be a mall, I kid you not. When they built Route 33 business out there with the double lanes and all that, they were going to build a mall right here and we would have Monmouth Battlefield Mall. But fortunately, the state stepped in. This is historic ground. I don't know if they condemned it or whatever, but they spent several years buying up the land. And the mall developers went 2 miles up the road to the old raceway track, which is why we have now Freehold Raceway Mall. And the battlefield is not a parking lot. So the battle site, along with the battlefield, were saved. There were 3,000 Union troops there trained in the summer of 1862, one of which is the 14th, which I spoke about. The other two are the 28th and 29th that I'll be talking about in December. The 14th Regiment was named the camp was named after Judge Vredenburg. Peter Vredenburg, the son, was an officer, but a staff officer in the middle part of the war. When the regiment had first been at Frederick on bridge duty, and then came back and fought at Cold Harbor, and then at Monocacy. And because so many officers were casualty at Monocacy, he offered to come back and got killed leading his troops in the first battle at 3rd Winchester. And he's buried here in town under a gravestone that doesn't have his unit on it. So that's my talk. I'd be glad to answer questions. I thank you all for coming out. Any general questions I can? Okay, yes.
The third battle of Winchester, was that the one where Phil Sheridan had?
That's Cedar Creek is what you're thinking of.
Oh, Cedar Creek.
Yeah. First Winchester is known as Kernstown, Stonewall Jackson victory. Second Winchester was by during the Gettysburg campaign, the Confederate victory. And third Winchester, we won this one. But Winchester changed hands probably more than any town in the war. At the northern end of the valley, it was a big site for building wagons and whatnot. At the entrance to the valley and Front Royal. But no, you were thinking of Cedar Creek, where we lost big in the morning, and then Phil Sheridan came back and won in the afternoon.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. And it's interesting still, you can drive down Route 11 in the Shenandoah Valley, and every 5 miles there's a battle or a marker. Still, I love looking at the mountains there. Okay, anything else? Yes, Corner?
Yeah, at the beginning of the war and for the first year, certainly they're lining up in formations and blasting away at each other. At some point, does somebody start getting an idea that this is a lousy way to conduct a war and we're slaughtering each other massively? Any creative original thinking on that?
Well, okay, you're talking evolution of tactics based on the weaponry. What happened here at Monmouth, they're using the muzzle loading guns, and they can only shoot about 50 yards. And you're lucky to hit something you're shooting at. Although once rifled muskets come in, the Davy Crockett type, you can shoot a squirrel out of a tree at 200 yards. They're starting to come in the Revolution. They're used bigger time, I think, in the Mexican War. They are the problem with the Civil War, as you point out, is they're using antiquated tactics that weren't keeping up with the weaponry. Cannons here can shoot half a mile max. A cannon in the Civil War can hit something at a mile. The muskets at the Revolution, 50 yards. Civil War, 300 yards. And you might hit what you're looking at, although they're still all lining up. Part of the problem is there's so much smoke on the battlefield, sometimes you can't see what's going on. And what's amazing to me is if Gettysburg is fought by maybe 80,000 men on the side, there's less Confederate, more Union, 160,000 men, each soldier shot 30 to 40 shots. How many, that's 3 million? I mean, the number of shots per casualty is pretty high. They aren't really hitting people. They don't have in Gatling guns yet. And the saddest thing is not Civil War. They should have figured that out, because massive charges shoulder to shoulder, like Bigot's charge, or Cold Harbor or Fredericksburg, will cause heavy casualties because the enemy's lined up with their cannons. They're still in World War I doing shoulder to shoulder charges against machine guns. That's what's really stupid, where the tactics are not keeping up with the weaponry. In modern battle, clearly, we don't line up shoulder to shoulder. I guess we're sending in drones and tanks, and the infantryman has, I don't know, I'm not up on modern military history, Gary, maybe you are. The job of the infantry is to mop up after the tanks go through, as far as I figure out.
And the funny thing is, they still had more. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 70s, Iran sent waves of men against Iraqi machine gun nests, and it didn't work real well then either.
Yeah, and you think they'd learn from history, but I say World War I, even though there's heavy casualties in World War II, and a lot of that is just big captures. I was watching the History Channel this morning. I think World War I was bloodier for people involved, and all. Plus, they brought in the gas attacks and airplanes they didn't know what to do with and all that. But again, war is a terrible thing, and it's a shame we can't negotiate out of this. In 1860, when the South started seceding after Lincoln was elected, there was something called the Crittenden Compromise that was discussed. New Jersey was a big part of that, to try and negotiate a peace. Lincoln offered to buy the slaves from the South on credit and then pay them back slowly and ship them back to Africa. And they didn't want anything to do with that because the war, other lectures I give, yes, slavery is involved, but the war is mainly over political control of the government. And it had worked because the way the Senate was set up, and as long as you had a friendly Northern Democrat, the South was happy. But once Lincoln got elected as a Republican, even though he promised not to disturb slavery, and they saw that more states were coming in north of the Mason-Dixon line, because who's got slaves, at least up in the Dakotas, Kansas, Nebraska, they were arguing about. They saw they'd lose control of the Senate, and if they didn't have the presidency, they couldn't control the Supreme Court anymore. And the South had different economic goals than the North did, and I think that's what it was all fought about. Anyway, to answer your original question, yeah, they should have been educated on. Even Lee, who's teaching tactics at West Point before the war, should have known that shoulder-to-shoulder attacks don't work. And he got in trouble at Malvern Hill in 1862, which is probably even worse than Pickett's Charge, but you don't hear that much about it. And then the North at Fredericksburg and Cold Harbor, same thing. You can't line up. But then how do you have enough manpower to carry a position by direct attack if you don't mass it? Well, you get around behind them. And that's what the British wanted to do here at Monmouth, and what the British did at Brandywine and Long Island is you line up facing the enemy, get their attention, shoot cannons at them, and work somebody around one of their flanks. Because once you get in behind them, then you can chase them off the field. But that's too much cleverness, I guess, of maneuvering, and too many Civil War soldiers, generals, other than Lee and Jackson, weren't doing that. So anyway, it's a long answer to your good question. So anything else? Okay, I'd be glad to.
Questions.
Yeah.
Additionally, along the way with your answer.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'll be pleased to chat with any of you afterwards. Thank you for coming out. I'm not sure what my topic is next month. It might be Civil War, Revolutionary Artillery. But the full list of talks, I need to talk to my agent better, is on our website. And second Sunday every month, you get a free lecture here, usually to do with Monmouth. So again, thank you for coming.